Naomi Cole woke up at dawn to the soft glow of the rising sun peeking through her bedroom curtains. She stretched her arms carefully over the slight curve of her growing belly, reminding herself once again that she was 7 months pregnant. Some days, she felt the surge of joy that came with carrying new life. Other days, she worried if her husband, Eric, shared the same excitement he once did. Lately, his behavior had raised countless questions in her mind. If anyone had glanced at their wedding photos, they would see a vision of happiness. Naomi, with her dark hair cascading down her back, wore a radiant smile. Eric, tall and confident, had eyes only for her, at least in those captured memories. The early years of their marriage had been blissful. They traveled together, shared inside jokes, and built a future filled with promise. They were the kind of couple friends envied, at least on the surface. As she got out of bed, Naomi felt the familiar twinge in her lower back that her doctor said was normal. Just the weight of the baby, she reminded herself. She carefully made her way to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. The morning sun illuminated the marble countertops and stainless steel appliances that Eric had been so proud to install. Everything in their home was neat, orderly, and, until recently, overflowing with love. She glanced at the clock on the microwave. 6:45 a.m. Eric was usually up by now, sipping coffee and checking emails for work. But for the past few months, he had been leaving home earlier and earlier, barely speaking to her. Naomi tried to brush it off at first, attributing it to a big project at his marketing firm. However, the distance between them had grown into a chasm she could no longer ignore. Just as she set 2 mugs on the counter, Eric emerged from their bedroom, already dressed in a crisp suit, his tie immaculately knotted. His briefcase was in hand, and his phone was pressed to his ear. Naomi could tell from his tone and the softness in his voice that he was smiling for whoever was on the other end of that call, an expression she rarely saw directed at her these days. He caught sight of her, gave a quick nod, and pointed at his phone in a gesture that signaled, "I can't talk now." Naomi suppressed a sigh of frustration. When he finally hung up, he said only, "I'm heading out early. Big day at the office. Don't wait up." "Wait, Eric," she managed, keeping her voice steady. "I made coffee for us." He paused almost impatiently. "Great, thanks," he said, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, he brushed past her, the subtle scent of his expensive cologne lingering in the air. "I'll grab something on the way." She watched the front door close behind him, the latch clicking louder in her ears than usual. Something was off, and she could feel it in the pit of her stomach. It was a dull, nagging sensation, like a warning bell that refused to be silenced. Naomi stood in the empty kitchen, the half-filled mug of coffee growing cold. She found herself thinking back to the day she told Eric she was pregnant, the way his eyes lit up, the way he wrapped her in his arms, spinning her around the living room as if the world were theirs. "I'm going to be a dad," he had shouted, breathless with joy. Now that memory felt like it belonged to a different life. Needing someone to confide in, she picked up her phone and dialed her best friend, Alyssa. "He left again without a word," Naomi said, holding back tears. "He's so cold these days. I barely recognize him." Alyssa, who had known Naomi since their college days, listened with empathetic concern. "Have you tried telling him how you feel?" she asked. "Sometimes men get overwhelmed with the idea of fatherhood. It's a huge responsibility." Naomi bit her lower lip. "I did try. He says I'm making a big deal out of nothing." She paused, struggling to find the right words. "It's not just that he's busy. It's like he doesn't want to be around me." They spoke for a few more minutes, Alyssa reassuring her that she was probably overthinking. Yet, when the call ended and the kitchen fell silent, Naomi felt as though something far more serious than overwork was driving Eric away. Her instincts nudged her with increasing urgency, warning her that the foundation of her marriage was on the brink of collapse. Determined not to let her day spiral into despair, Naomi forced herself to shower, dress comfortably, and eat a light breakfast. She planned to spend her morning checking the nursery. The baby's room was a calming space, painted in a gentle shade of pale green. A white crib stood in the corner, and a mobile of soft clouds and stars hung overhead. She ran her hand over the edge of the crib, remembering how Eric had painstakingly assembled it. "Where are you, Eric?" she murmured to herself. Not just physically, but emotionally. She wanted the loving, enthusiastic father-to-be by her side, helping her choose baby clothes and attend prenatal classes. Instead, she was met with distance and an unsettling tension that grew heavier each day. That evening, when Eric finally came home, it was well past 9. Naomi had dozed off on the couch. She woke to the sound of the front door opening, heart pounding. She sat up, bracing herself for whatever cold indifference might greet her this time. But Eric walked straight to the bedroom without a word. She heard the shower running a minute later, the water drumming on the tiles like an unspoken barrier between them. Naomi swallowed her sorrow, tears stinging at the corners of her eyes. She could feel the baby kicking, as if sensing her distress. Placing her hand gently on her belly, she whispered, "It's going to be okay, little one." But deep down, she wondered how much longer she could keep telling herself that lie. And so, in that weak swirl of unspoken words and tense silences, Naomi and Eric's picture-perfect marriage began to show its first ominous cracks. Eric Cole had never thought of himself as the kind of man to have an affair. He prided himself on integrity, especially in the early days of his marriage. But somewhere along the line, complacency set in. Then came Jessica, a whirlwind of charisma and flirtation, someone who adored capturing attention wherever she went. They first met at a corporate networking event 6 months ago. Eric had been engrossed in a conversation about marketing strategies when Jessica glided into the room. She wore a sleek red dress, her blonde hair cascading around her shoulders. Confidence radiated off her, and she seemed to draw every gaze like a magnet. "Eric Cole, right?" she asked, her voice sultry yet poised. "I've heard a lot about you at the firm. Mind if I join in?" He remembered feeling oddly flattered that she even knew his name. They shook hands, and she leaned in just a fraction closer than necessary. At the time, he dismissed it as mere friendliness. But in the weeks that followed, Jessica kept appearing, at the gym in his office building, at lunch spots he frequented, even at the local cafe where he grabbed his morning coffee. Each time, she had a reason to strike up a conversation. Sometimes it was a casual question about work, other times it was a playful joke that would make Eric chuckle despite himself. Gradually, he found himself looking forward to these chance encounters. It felt nice to be seen, especially when Naomi's pregnancy had changed the dynamic at home, requiring so much focus on appointments and future baby plans. One evening, Jessica orchestrated a late-night brainstorming session that seemed specifically designed for just the two of them. They stayed after hours in the conference room, the city lights shimmering through the glass walls. Eric felt a subtle shift in the air. With each smile she gave him, each light touch on his arm, he felt the tension between them deepen. He recalled that night vividly, how she locked eyes with him and said, "You deserve someone who sees how talented you are, who doesn't just see you as a paycheck or a footnote in their story. You deserve real appreciation." Eric's marriage to Naomi was far from a footnote, but Jessica's words made him question whether he had become more of a caregiver than a partner in his own home. Naomi's pregnancy demands had naturally shifted her focus, and Eric, immaturely, longed for the attention he used to receive. He ignored the guilt, shoved aside the knowledge that he was betraying not just Naomi, but himself, too. Before he realized it, Eric was driving Jessica to a trendy rooftop bar to discuss work. Conversation flowed freely, and at some point, they both knew the professional pretense had fallen away. She leaned in, her breath warm against his ear, and whispered, "Why don't you come over to my place? It's quieter there." He followed. They crossed a line that night, one that Eric had once promised he would never cross. Afterwards, he drove home in a haze of regret mixed with adrenaline. He felt a pang of guilt every time he saw Naomi's trusting face. Yet he also kept justifying his actions with silent resentments. Naomi was distant too, always tired or anxious about the baby, rarely making time for him or his needs. Jessica made him feel special, desired. She filled the gaps in his ego, telling him how smart he was, how she admired his ambition. She planted seeds of doubt about Naomi. "She's changed," Jessica would say. "She's too clingy. Doesn't she realize you're your own person?" Eric bit his tongue, fighting the urge to defend his wife. But somewhere along the line, he stopped defending her entirely. Instead, he found himself nodding, letting Jessica's words seep in. The more he listened, the more his perception of Naomi shifted. Little quirks he once adored in Naomi now struck him as overreactions or nagging tendencies. "Eric, you know you could do so much better," Jessica purred one night in a dimly lit hotel room. "You have so much potential. You shouldn't be tied down if you're not happy." Naomi was carrying his child, an indisputable fact that weighed on Eric's conscience at times. Yet, each new morning saw him heading to work with an eagerness to see Jessica, to share an inside joke or a stolen kiss behind closed doors. It became a game, a dangerous secret that gave him an odd sense of thrill. Naomi, on the other hand, was slowly drowning in suspicion. She hadn't confronted him yet. Instead, she lingered in a perpetual state of hope, telling herself it was just a phase. But Eric's phone buzzed constantly with messages he quickly dismissed. He began working late with no plausible explanation. He brought home no stories of his day, only silence or irritation whenever Naomi tried to engage him. One afternoon, in a quiet office corridor, Jessica cornered Eric with a smirk. "Naomi just doesn't get it," she said, leaning against the wall, her arms folded. "You're not the same people you used to be. People grow apart." Eric exhaled, the weight of guilt pressing on his chest. "She's pregnant," he mumbled, as if that were an excuse or a reason to feel trapped. Jessica rolled her eyes. "Yes, and you're not doing her any favors by pretending. If you're not into this anymore, cut the cord. Or do you want to spend your life with someone who bores you?" Eric flinched at the word bored. Yet, a small part of him wondered if that was what he felt. The old spark in his marriage seemed gone, replaced by responsibilities and an impending future that felt daunting. Naomi's moods, her concerns, her physical exhaustion. He saw it all through a lens that Jessica had helped place over his eyes. A few days later, Jessica suggested a weekend trip to a nearby resort. "Just the two of us," she urged with a seductive grin. "You deserve some fun." Eric hesitated. Naomi would be 7 months pregnant. Was it right to vanish like that? Then again, was it right to continue this double life? He convinced himself he needed clarity. So he accepted. He called Naomi later that evening and lied about a mandatory team-building retreat. Naomi's voice wavered, but she didn't protest. "I'll be okay," she said too softly. "We'll just miss you." "We," Eric echoed, the weight of the unborn child pressing on his mind. Naomi and the baby, he thought. How easily he was betraying them both. Over that weekend, Jessica reinforced the narrative that Naomi was too needy. She fed Eric's ego with compliments and told him Naomi was stifling his freedom. "She makes you feel guilty just for living your life," Jessica insisted as they lounged by the pool, sipping cocktails. Eric's phone buzzed with several missed calls from Naomi. He switched it off. Guilt flickered, but he drowned it in the neon lights of the resort's bar, lost in Jessica's laughter and the momentary escape from responsibility. On Sunday night, when the trip ended, Eric found himself back on the highway heading home, stomach tight with unease. Jessica slept in the passenger seat, a satisfied smile on her face. He glanced at her from time to time, wondering if he was driving towards a more fulfilling life, or a tragic, irreversible mistake. In that moment, Eric couldn't see that the seeds of betrayal were already sprouting into something that would one day shatter the illusion of control he thought he had. He would learn all too soon that actions have consequences, and that karma keeps a meticulous ledger. For now, though, all he saw was the open road ahead, unsure of whether he was heading toward freedom or destruction. Naomi woke up in the middle of the night again. Her recurring insomnia was fueled by an unsettling blend of pregnancy discomfort and a mounting sense of dread. She ran her fingers over her belly, feeling the baby shift. The sensation was at once miraculous and lonely. Eric was on the other side of the bed, turned away from her. At least he was home tonight. But even in sleep, There was a distance between them that seemed impossible to cross. Memories flooded her mind. Their first date at a little Italian bistro. The time he brought her flowers for no reason. The moment they decided to have a child. How had they drifted so far from that happiness? The doctor's words echoed in Naomi's head. Stress isn't good for you or the baby. You need rest and a calm environment. But finding calm in her emotional storm felt next to impossible. She tried everything, soft music, meditation, even reading parenting blogs that usually filled her with excitement. But her worry about Eric overshadowed all else. One afternoon, she decided to take the bold step of following her intuition. She glanced at his phone when he left it charging by the kitchen island. The device was locked, of course, but the screen flashed a new message. Can't wait to see you later, babe. The contact name was saved simply as J. Naomi's heart pounded so loudly, she could hear it in her ears. She felt sweaty and lightheaded, her breath coming in quick gasps. She sank into a nearby chair, her hand on her abdomen. Calm down, she told herself, trying to stabilize her breathing. But the realization of what J might represent was suffocating. She thought of confronting him right then and there, but a wave of anxiety froze her in place. Instead, she left the phone where it was and went to lie down. A half hour later, Eric emerged from the bedroom, asking if she'd seen his phone. Naomi forced a neutral expression. You left it in the kitchen, she said, feigning nonchalance. He offered a quick thanks and walked away. She noticed a tension in his posture when he checked the screen, as if worried she might have seen something. Naomi closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her cheeks. She wished she could unknow what she knew, but there was no going back. Later that evening, the house was oppressively silent. Naomi found Eric in the living room, typing furiously on his laptop. Summoning her courage, she approached him. Eric, can we talk? He sighed, still tapping keys. I'm in the middle of something. Can it wait? No, she insisted, her voice trembling. It can't. I feel like you're avoiding me, Eric. You come home late. You don't answer my calls half the time. I'm scared. Finally, he shut his laptop with a snap. Scared of what? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Scared of losing you, she managed, blinking back tears. I feel like we're drifting apart, and I don't know why. We have a baby on the way, and I need you. We both need you. Eric ran a hand through his hair, avoiding her gaze. I've been busy at work. I'm doing what I need to provide for us. Then why don't I feel you here with me? Even when you're physically present, she pressed, trying to keep her composure. He stood up abruptly, pushing the laptop aside. Naomi, you worry too much. Everything isn't about your feelings. My job is stressful, and you're constantly needing attention. It's draining. His harsh words stung like a slap. Naomi took a shaky breath, trying to remain calm for the baby's sake. Eric, we used to talk about everything. Now you barely look at me. I just want us to be a family. He turned away, rubbing his temples as if warding off a headache. Stop making such a big deal out of this, he muttered. I'm going out for a walk. When the front door slammed behind him, Naomi felt an emptiness in the pit of her stomach. She cradled her belly, whispering to the baby that everything would be okay, even as her own heart filled with panic. Days turned into weeks, and Eric's late nights became more frequent. Naomi's fears reached a fever pitch when she overheard him on a phone call late one night. She had woken up from a restless sleep, needing water, when she heard his muffled laughter in the living room. Curiosity drove her closer to the door, and that's when she heard him say, You're right. She's just overreacting. I can't wait to see you tomorrow. Then a pause, followed by a low chuckle that Naomi hadn't heard him use in ages. Her stomach twisted in knots, and she pressed a hand against her mouth to stop a sob from escaping. The sound of his happiness, directed at someone else, confirmed her worst fear. Eric was with another woman. She didn't confront him that night. Instead, she crept back to bed, tears streaming down her face. If she confronted him, what would he say? Would he lie? Or would he leave her for good? The questions pounded in her head, each darker than the last. A few days later, Alyssa stopped by to check on her. You look pale, Alyssa observed, worry creasing her forehead. Are you taking care of yourself? Naomi tried to force a smile. I'm trying. Eric's different. I'm almost certain he's seeing someone else. Alyssa's eyes widened. Have you asked him directly? Naomi shook her head, tears threatening again. I don't know if I can handle his answer. Alyssa squeezed Naomi's hand. You can't live like this, Naomi. It's not healthy for you or the baby. She nodded, realizing that her friend was right. She had to confront the situation, no matter how painful. That night, she resolved to speak to Eric openly. But Eric came home in a foul mood, slamming doors and glaring at her when she asked how his day went. She lost her nerve, her resolve crumbling under the weight of his anger. As the days dragged on, Naomi found herself silently pleading for some sign that Eric could be saved from whatever had entranced him. She prayed he would notice her heartbreak, feel some spark of empathy that would pull them back to their loving bond. But each day, her hope dimmed further. And so, Naomi's fears quietly grew, gnawing away at the last remnants of the marriage she thought she had. The more she worried, the more Eric withdrew, caught in the magnetic pull of Jessica and the illusion of escape she offered. Unbeknownst to all of them, the real storm was just around the corner, an event that would change their lives and bring karma knocking at Eric's door in a way no one anticipated. Naomi woke up on a Monday morning with a renewed sense of determination. She decided she couldn't let the silence and suspicion continue to poison her mind. She had to fight for her marriage, for their child's future. She knew Eric was leaving for work around 8 a.m., so she hurriedly wrote a note on a pastel-colored sticky pad and stuck it on the fridge where he would see it. Eric, please come home for dinner tonight at 7. It's important. I love you. All day. Naomi planned how to make the evening special. She scoured her recipe books for Eric's favorite dish, rosemary garlic lamb with roasted vegetables. It had been one of the first fancy meals she'd cooked for him when they were dating, and he used to rave about it to their friends. She prayed it would stir a memory of happier times. By late afternoon, the house was filled with the warm aroma of herbs and sizzling meat. She carefully set the dining table with a linen tablecloth, adding 2 ivory candles in silver holders. She even arranged a small vase of fresh flowers in the center, a little burst of color to brighten the space. As she worked, she rehearsed what she would say to Eric, trying to keep her voice calm and loving. She wanted to avoid confrontation. She imagined a scenario where Eric would walk in, see the effort she'd made, and realize how much she cared. Maybe he'd open up, apologize, and tell her everything that was weighing on his mind. And if there was indeed another woman, maybe he'd realize it was a mistake and end it. She checked the clock. 6:50 p.m. Her nerves were on edge, but her resolve remained strong. She paced the living room, glancing at the front door every few minutes. At 7 p.m., the food was ready, and she lit the candles, the soft glow reflecting off the polished wooden table. Minutes turned to an hour, and still no sign of Eric. By 8 p.m., the food had grown cold, the candles had burned halfway, and the anxiety in Naomi's chest felt like a physical weight. She dialed Eric's number, but it went straight to voicemail. By 9 p.m., she had tried calling him 5 more times, each time met with the same recorded message. She sank into a dining chair, tears welling in her eyes. The floral centerpiece now mocked her optimism. Each tick of the clock seemed to echo her despair. The reality was impossible to ignore. Eric was choosing to be anywhere but here. At 10 p.m., with her belly growling and her back aching, Naomi made herself a small plate of food. She barely tasted it. She felt lightheaded from hunger and heartbreak, but she needed some nourishment for the baby. The half-eaten lamb and limp vegetables on her plate felt like a grim metaphor for her marriage, something once filled with promise, now left neglected. Finally, around 11:30 p.m., Naomi heard the hum of an engine in the driveway. Her heart pounded as she hurried to unlock the door. Eric stumbled in, the faint smell of perfume on his clothes, a hint of lipstick on his collar. Naomi froze, her throat constricting. His eyes, cloudy and somewhat irritated, met hers with a flicker of guilt. Or was it annoyance? He brushed past her, muttering, I'm tired. She found her voice, though it came out shaky. Eric, I made a special dinner for you. I waited for hours. He dropped his briefcase by the door and pulled off his tie. I got caught up at work, and then I went for drinks with some colleagues. You know how it is. Naomi's voice quivered. Your phone was off. Eric shrugged, refusing to meet her eyes. It died. She felt tears sting her eyes, but she swallowed hard, determined not to start a shouting match. Eric, can't you see how hard this is for me? I'm pregnant, and I need you here. I've been trying to reach you all night. He sighed, rolling his eyes. Stop acting like it's the end of the world, Naomi. It's just dinner. Naomi's frustration finally broke through. It's not just dinner. It's us. We barely talk anymore. You're never home. And I feel like I'm losing you. Eric flinched at the intensity of her words, but his defensive walls shot up. You're always making these scenes. Maybe if you weren't so dramatic, I'd want to be here more. Shock and pain flashed across Naomi's face. Her voice cracked as she whispered, I'm pregnant with our child, Eric. I'm lonely, scared, and you're all I have. He stood silent for a moment, as if searching for a reply but finding none that could justify his betrayal. Finally, he grabbed his briefcase and headed toward the bedroom. I'm done talking tonight, he said, disappearing around the corner. Naomi stood there, body trembling, tears rolling down her cheeks in silent streams. She could hardly process the hurt. The dinner remained untouched on the table. The candles nearly burned out, leaving a faint trail of smoke and the smell of wasted wax. She stared at the remnants of the meal, the pots and pans in the sink, feeling utterly defeated. The evening had been her desperate attempt to reconnect, to salvage what was left of their love. Instead, it ended in another argument, followed by Eric's callous disregard. That night, Naomi barely slept. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, reliving every moment of their relationship, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when things began to unravel. Was it when she got pregnant? Was it when Eric started coming home late? Or was it simply that they had grown apart, as he seemed to suggest? Around 3 a.m., she gave up on sleep and wandered into the nursery. The soft glow of the night light illuminated the empty crib. She ran her fingers over the plush blanket she had bought months ago. You deserve a loving family, she whispered to the unborn child within her, tears dripping onto the wooden crib frame. I'm trying, baby. I'm trying so hard. In the distance, she heard Eric's muffled snores from the master bedroom. An overwhelming sense of sadness weighed on her. She thought back to her vow to fight for her marriage, but for the first time, she wondered if she was fighting a losing battle. Still, Naomi resolved that the next morning would be a new opportunity. Maybe she could contact a marriage counselor or reach out to Eric during his lunch break. She refused to give up, clinging to the last shreds of optimism. But unbeknownst to her, events would soon spiral out of her control, forcing her to face a cruel reality and setting the stage for karma's swift arrival. 2 days after the disastrous dinner attempt, Naomi found herself alone in the house once again. Eric had left before dawn, leaving behind an unmade bed and a faint hint of cologne lingering in the air. Naomi busied herself folding baby clothes, tiny onesies and soft blankets that brought her moments of fleeting joy. She imagined holding her newborn, counting tiny fingers and toes, and forgetting all her sorrows in that precious face. Yet, every time she glanced at her phone, an uneasy feeling crept up her spine. Eric had promised the day before that he would try to be home earlier, but she had no faith in that promise anymore. Late that evening, around midnight, as she was drifting off to sleep with a parenting book in hand, a sharp, debilitating pain shot through her abdomen. Her eyes flew open in alarm. At first, she thought it might be Braxton Hicks contractions. Her doctor had warned her about those. But this was more intense, more insistent. She struggled to sit up, the pain radiating around her back. Another wave hit, forcing a gasp from her lips. No, not now, she whispered, pressing a trembling hand to her belly. She was only 7 months along, too soon for labor. Yet her body didn't seem to care about calendars or ideal timings. Panicked, she reached for her phone. She dialed Eric's number with shaky fingers. No answer. She tried again. Still no answer. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and her breathing came in ragged bursts. The baby kicked as if equally distressed, and Naomi felt tears spring to her eyes. On her third attempt, Eric finally picked up. His voice came through, slightly slurred. "What is it, Naomi?" She inhaled painfully. "Eric, I'm in so much pain. Something's wrong. I think it might be labor." He let out a short laugh, a sound that chilled her. "Are you serious? It's too early. You're probably overreacting again. Just call the hospital. They'll know what to do." Her heart plummeted. "Eric, please, I'm begging you. I'm alone. I need you." He sighed, as if annoyed. "I said call the hospital. I'm busy right now. Don't panic for no reason." Then came the click, the dead air of a disconnected call. Naomi stared at her phone in disbelief, tears welling up and spilling over. A fierce contraction ripped through her abdomen, and she let out a cry. Gritting her teeth, she knew she had no choice but to find help on her own. She fumbled for the emergency number, pressing it with unsteady hands. The operator's voice was calm and professional, but Naomi could barely string a sentence together between the waves of pain. "I'm pregnant 7 months, severe contractions alone." An ambulance was dispatched immediately. Naomi crawled to the door, propping it open before collapsing onto the floor, her vision blurred by tears and agony. Her thoughts raced as she waited, each second feeling like an eternity. "Eric, how could you?" she thought, a mix of heartbreak and desperation pounding in her chest. Memories flashed. The day she told him she was pregnant and the joy in his eyes. How had they gone from that moment to this? Sirens pierced the quiet suburban street, and paramedics burst into the house. In a flurry of movement, they eased Naomi onto a stretcher, asking her questions she could barely process. She managed to convey her due date and the nature of her pain. They placed an oxygen mask over her face, and she closed her eyes, focusing on inhaling and exhaling through the contractions. As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, Naomi prayed silently for her baby's life. She clutched the edges of the gurney, tears spilling as she imagined what could go wrong with such an early labor. She had heard stories of premature babies fighting for survival in incubators, their futures uncertain. The thought of losing her baby or facing complications terrified her. When they arrived at the emergency entrance, doctors and nurses quickly took charge. Naomi was wheeled into the maternity wing, bright fluorescent lights glaring down at her. Her vision blurred in and out. She caught glimpses of medical equipment, heard urgent voices discussing fetal heart rates, IVs, and possible emergency procedures. "Where's the father?" asked one nurse, pressing a stethoscope to Naomi's belly. He's not here," Naomi managed between gasps. "Call him, please." A wave of sympathy flickered across the nurse's face, but she quickly turned her attention to hooking Naomi up to monitors. The beeping of the fetal heart monitor filled the room, each beep a fragile testament to the new life struggling inside her. Over the next hour, Naomi fought through contractions. The obstetrician on call explained the baby was indeed coming early. "We'll do everything we can," the doctor assured her, injecting a calm confidence into her trembling heart. "Right now, you need to focus on your breathing and staying as relaxed as possible." Naomi nodded, though fear threatened to consume her. She was in a hospital room, alone except for the medical staff, wishing Eric would burst through the door any second. But he never came. Instead, her phone lay silent in her bag, no calls or messages to offer comfort. Her thoughts flickered to the life she had envisioned for her child, a nursery with pastel walls, the crib they had painstakingly assembled, and the bedtime stories she had prepared. Was all of that in jeopardy now? She let out a strangled cry, both from the physical torment and the emotional betrayal. "Hold on," a nurse said gently, wiping sweat from Naomi's brow. "We've got you." Naomi clenched her eyes shut, imagining a protective bubble around her and the baby. She visualized the child's tiny heartbeat, strong and determined. She didn't know if Eric would ever come. She didn't know if their marriage had any hope of surviving. But in that moment, all that mattered was saving her baby's life and her own. As she was wheeled into the labor and delivery room, Naomi braced herself for the hardest fight she had ever faced. She whispered a final prayer, for mercy, for strength, for a miracle. She had no inkling that, miles away, Eric's life was about to unravel in a way that would match the pain she was enduring. As she battled through each contraction, the wheels of karma began their relentless turn, setting into motion consequences that would soon shatter Eric's illusions. The sterile scent of disinfectant permeated the hospital corridor as Naomi's gurney raced toward the operating theater. Under the harsh white lights, her face was etched with exhaustion, panic, and intense resolve. She had never felt so vulnerable, yet so determined to protect the life she carried within her. Nurses and doctors prepared her for a possible emergency C-section, given how premature her labor was. But first, they needed to assess whether a natural delivery could proceed without endangering the baby. Through it all, Naomi clutched the bed rails, gasping through the pain. She tried to keep her mind focused on a single truth: my baby will survive. I must survive. Time became a strange blur. She vaguely recalled a conversation where the obstetrician told her they'd administer medication to help with the baby's lung development, a precaution for premature births. She felt 4 needles slip into her arm, sending a cold rush of fluids through her veins. Each contraction felt like a wave of fire. Despite the agony, she forced herself not to scream too loudly. She was terrified that each cry might steal oxygen that the baby needed. In the moments when the pain ebbed, she remembered Eric's dismissive words over the phone. Don't overreact. Anger mingled with heartbreak, fueling a surge of adrenaline. She thought of calling him again, but she could barely move her arms without tremors of pain. A nurse gently offered to call, but Naomi shook her head. He won't come, she muttered, voice cracking. He made his choice. Sympathy shone in the nurse's eyes, but she said nothing. Instead, she double-checked the fetal monitor. The baby's heartbeat thudded, each beat carrying a frantic urgency. Meanwhile, Naomi's mind raced with questions. How would she raise this baby alone if Eric left? Could she handle the financial burden, the emotional toll? She felt guilt flooding her. Maybe she had driven Eric away somehow. She fought to tamp down those thoughts, focusing on the immediate crisis. Amid the nurses bustling about, a kindly older woman in scrubs approached. I'm Karen, she said softly, placing a reassuring hand on Naomi's forehead. I'll be your primary nurse tonight. We're going to do everything we can for you and your baby. Thank you, Naomi whispered, tears welling. I'm so scared. Karen offered a small smile. I know. Let's see if we can bring that blood pressure down a bit, okay? Breathe with me. Naomi tried to follow Karen's instructions, inhaling deeply through her nose and exhaling slowly through her mouth. The contraction eased slightly, and Naomi fell back against the pillow, sweat drenching her hairline. The next few hours were a test of endurance. Her labor progressed quickly but precariously. Each measurement showed the baby was inching closer to being born, but the risk of complications hovered like a dark cloud. Naomi mustered her strength, chanting silent prayers. Sometime around dawn, a small flurry of activity signaled that the moment was near. Another nurse, Sarah, lifted Naomi's legs into stirrups. The doctor at the foot of the bed urged Naomi to push with each contraction. Naomi pushed, tears streaming down her face, her vision half blurred from pain and exhaustion. Come on, Naomi, Karen encouraged, her voice unwavering. You're almost there. Naomi's mind conjured a picture of a tiny baby cradled in her arms, healthy and breathing, safe. She clung to that vision, letting it propel her through the most excruciating moments. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime compressed into minutes, a thin wail cut through the air. Naomi heard the sound of her baby's first cry, a fragile, trembling note that instantly became the center of her universe. Relief, fear, love, and despair all mixed in a tidal wave of emotion. She barely had a chance to see the baby's face before the medical team whisked the tiny form away to a neonatal incubator. Naomi caught a glimpse of a wrinkled, precious face, and then the baby was gone, transported to the NICU for urgent care. Her breath hitched, and exhaustion consumed her. A nurse guided her to breathe, telling her they would stabilize her now. She felt hands pressing on her abdomen, the doctor working to ensure there were no complications post-delivery. Naomi realized she was trembling uncontrollably, tears sliding unchecked down her cheeks. Is my baby okay?" she managed to rasp. "They're doing everything they can," Karen said, her expression gentle but professional. "The baby is premature, so there will be challenges. But the NICU staff is excellent." Naomi nodded weakly, too drained to speak further. An overwhelming emptiness washed over her as she lay there, alone in the bed. There was no hand to hold, no reassuring whispers of "you did it." Instead, the father of her child was absent, lost in another woman's world. Back in her hospital room, Naomi drifted in and out of a fitful sleep. Sometime around mid-morning, she awoke to find Alyssa by her bedside. Her friend's eyes were puffy, as though she had been crying. "Naomi," Alyssa exclaimed, reaching for her hand. "I'm so sorry I got here so late. I came as soon as I heard. Are you okay? How's the baby?" Naomi's eyes filled again at the compassion in Alyssa's voice. She recounted in broken sentences how the labor started abruptly and how Eric had laughed off her call for help. Alyssa's expression darkened in anger, but she chose her words carefully. "That's unforgivable," she finally said, her grip tightening around Naomi's hand. "But right now, focus on getting stronger. I'll stay with you as long as you need." Naomi was grateful beyond words. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Alyssa's presence offered a semblance of comfort in the otherwise cold reality of her situation. Later, a doctor entered to explain the baby's condition. "Your child is stable for now, but will need to remain in the NICU. We're monitoring vitals, and we have the baby on a ventilator to assist with breathing. It's going to be a delicate process, but we're cautiously optimistic." Naomi forced a smile, nodding in understanding. "Thank you, doctor," she whispered, relief mingling with apprehension. She wanted to see her baby, to hold them against her chest, but her own weakened state required she stay in bed for a while longer. Between short naps, Naomi mustered the courage to check her phone. No messages from Eric. No missed calls. No texts asking if she was okay. The silence confirmed everything she needed to know. The next day, as soon as she was strong enough, Naomi insisted on seeing her baby. Karen helped her into a wheelchair and rolled her into the NICU. Rows of incubators lined the room, each holding a tiny life fighting for survival. Naomi's baby lay in one such incubator, small, fragile, tubes and wires attached to monitor oxygen levels, heart rate, and more. Tears blurred her vision as she placed a hand on the protective glass. "I'm here," she whispered. "I love you, sweetheart." In that moment, a fierce protective instinct roared within her. Regardless of Eric's betrayal, Naomi vowed she would do everything in her power to ensure this baby grew up safe and loved. She might have been struggling alone in this hospital, but she refused to let her baby feel alone ever. She didn't know when or if Eric would show up. Part of her still hoped he would walk through that door, realize his mistake, and beg for forgiveness. But another part of her, a growing part, accepted that he might never be the man she needed him to be. As she watched her tiny baby fighting to breathe, Naomi felt an odd sense of peace settle over her. Life had become chaotic, heartbreaking, and uncertain. But this little being was a new beginning, a reason to push forward. She was determined to find her strength, not just for herself, but for the fragile life that depended on her. And so, in that stark hospital ward, Naomi discovered a deep well of courage she never knew existed. She would need it, for the tidal wave of consequences set in motion by Eric's betrayal was about to crash down on both of them, bringing with it a reckoning that only fate could design. While Naomi battled for her life and her child's in the hospital, Eric's evening took a swift and unexpected turn. After brushing off Naomi's desperate call, he had spent the night with Jessica, indulging in drinks and whispered promises that fed his sense of escape. They lounged in Jessica's lavish apartment, a modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Eric felt a hollow contentment, sipping an expensive bourbon as he gazed at her porcelain features. Jessica was scrolling through her phone, occasionally chuckling at some text or social media notification. You really should post pictures of us, she teased, glancing at Eric from beneath perfectly curled lashes. I'm tired of being a secret. Eric tensed, a flicker of guilt darting across his face. We've talked about this. My situation is complicated. Jessica rolled her eyes. Complicated? You mean you're still wearing that ring and have a pregnant wife at home? The word stung Eric in a place he tried to ignore. I don't want to talk about Naomi, he muttered, taking another swig of bourbon. Well, I do, Jessica said, setting her phone aside. Her tone hardened. I'm tired of waiting in the wings while you play family man. If you want this to work, you need to finalize your break with her. Eric swallowed hard. He thought about the baby, the home he had built with Naomi, and the fleeting happiness he once knew. But that happiness had faded, replaced by arguments and constant tension. In Jessica's arms, life felt lighter, at least until the guilt came crashing in. This is more complicated than you realize, he tried to explain, but Jessica shook her head. Don't feed me excuses, Eric. I'm worth more than that, she snapped. She sighed dramatically, running a manicured hand through her hair. Look, I've been patient because you told me you were unhappy. But patience has its limits. Eric placed his glass on the coffee table, leaning forward. I just need more time. Let me figure out the best way. He was cut off by the shrill ring of Jessica's phone. She picked it up, scanning the screen with a sly smile. I need to take this. It's important, she purred, walking into another room and shutting the door behind her. Eric stared at the closed door, an uneasy feeling gnawing at his gut. He glanced at his own phone. Several missed calls from a hospital number flashed on the lock screen. Confusion furrowed his brow. Hospital, he thought. He hesitated, guilt creeping back in as he recalled Naomi's earlier call. Could something actually be wrong? Before he could dial back, Jessica emerged from the other room, a smug smile on her lips. She swayed over to him, pressing a quick kiss to his cheek. Sorry about that, she said, her tone suddenly dismissive. I need to pack. I'm leaving for a few days. Leaving? Where are you going? Eric asked, startled. She shrugged. Does it matter? I have some business to handle with a friend who's in town. A very wealthy friend, by the way. Eric felt a flicker of jealousy. Wealthy friend? Jessica gave a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, don't be so insecure, Eric. I have connections you can't even dream of. Now, I need to focus on my own life. You can figure out your marriage situation while I'm gone. A sense of dread settled over Eric. But what about us? Jessica shrugged, clearly unbothered. We'll see. To be honest, I need a man who can keep up with my lifestyle. You're still chained down by your home life. It's getting old, Eric. His stomach lurched. He had sacrificed so much, risked his entire marriage for this fling. And now Jessica was eyeing someone else with more money, more freedom. He tried to keep his voice steady. I thought we had something. She arched an eyebrow. We did. But honestly, Eric, you're not exactly the golden ticket I thought you were. Your finances are tied up with Naomi, and you're not making a clean break. I'm not a charity. I want a partner who can give me what I need without drama. He watched in disbelief as Jessica sauntered to her bedroom, her heels clicking on the polished floor. Moments later, she emerged with a suitcase. She paused by the front door, flipping her hair over her shoulder. You said you'd make a decision. If you ever do, and it's me, then show me you mean it. But don't expect me to wait around forever. I have options. With that, she turned on her heel and left, the door slamming shut behind her. Eric sat motionless on the couch, the weight of realization crashing down. He had thrown away his relationship with Naomi, his pregnant wife, for a woman who now saw him as nothing more than a temporary fling. He reached for his phone again. His heart pounded as he saw the repeated hospital calls. A swirling panic gripped him. Could something actually be wrong with Naomi? He thought, remembering the pain in her voice. Dialing the hospital back, he spoke to a curt receptionist who informed him that Naomi Cole had been admitted hours ago, was in premature labor, and had just delivered a baby. She's in critical condition, the receptionist added, transferring him to a nurse who gave more details. Eric's mind raced. Naomi had gone into early labor alone, without him by her side. A wave of shame, fear, and guilt tore through him. He grabbed his car keys and sprinted to the parking garage, cursing under his breath. He couldn't believe what he'd done, how cruel he had been. He drove recklessly through the city, running red lights and ignoring honking horns. By the time he reached the hospital, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale light over the emergency entrance. His stomach churned as he burst through the sliding doors. Naomi Cole, he gasped to the receptionist. Where is she? He was directed to the maternity ward, where a tired nurse pointed him down a hall. Heart hammering, he reached her room only to find it empty. Another nurse, carrying a tray of medical supplies, recognized Naomi's name and directed him to the NICU waiting area. There he saw Alyssa sitting in a chair, her eyes puffy from crying. The moment she spotted Eric, fury blazed across her face. She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. How dare you show up now? She hissed, her voice thick with emotion. Where were you all night when Naomi was calling you? Do you have any idea what she went through? Eric's eyes darted around, desperation etched into his features. How is she? And the baby? Alyssa folded her arms. The baby's in the NICU. Naomi is in recovery, exhausted and barely stable. She's been asking for you, even after all you've done. Shame twisted Eric's stomach. He wanted to rush to Naomi's side, but he knew he had no right to demand her forgiveness. Where is she? Alyssa glared. Room 513. But don't think you can just waltz in there and make everything okay. Eric nodded, swallowing hard. He slowly made his way to the room number Alyssa provided, each step feeling like a mile. His palms were sweaty, and his heart raced in dread of what he would find. When he finally opened the door, he saw Naomi lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to various monitors. Her face was pale, her hair matted with sweat. She looked so small, so fragile. A wave of regret hit him, like a punch in the gut. He approached, hands trembling at his sides. Naomi, he whispered, voice cracking. I'm so sorry. She opened her eyes weakly. They were distant, as though she were peering through a veil of pain and betrayal. Eric, she managed, her voice barely audible. The baby. He slumped into the chair beside her, tears threatening to spill. They told me the baby's in the NICU. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. She looked at him for a long moment, as if searching for the man she once knew. Then she turned her gaze to the white hospital wall, exhausted beyond words. Eric wanted to say 1,000 things, to beg for forgiveness, to promise he would change. But he sensed that, in this moment, words were cheap. He could do nothing but sit there, clutching her hand in silence, terrified he had already lost his wife and his child, victims of his own selfishness and karma's unyielding hand. For hours, Eric remained by Naomi's bedside, watching her shallow, labored breathing. Nurses came in periodically to check her vitals, adjusting IVs and jotting notes on a clipboard. Occasionally, Naomi would stir, mumble something unintelligible, then fall back into fitful sleep. Eric asked a passing nurse, "When can she see the baby?" The nurse's gaze softened. "She needs to stabilize first. Her blood pressure was dangerously high. She lost a lot of blood. For now, rest is crucial." He nodded solemnly. Every beep of the heart monitor felt like a condemnation of his betrayal. He couldn't help but wonder if his absence, his emotional neglect, had contributed to the strain on Naomi's body. Alyssa poked her head in the doorway, her expression still guarded. "Any change?" she asked quietly. Eric shook his head. "She wakes up, then drifts off. She's in a lot of pain." Alyssa stepped in, taking a seat on the opposite side of the bed. She glanced at Eric, her anger tempered by exhaustion. "She's strong," she said. "She'll pull through for the baby." Eric swallowed a lump in his throat. "How's the baby?" Alyssa sighed. "The baby is stable, but in critical condition. The doctors say each day is important for a preemie. They're monitoring everything: lungs, heart, temperature regulation." Eric buried his face in his hands, guilt crashing over him. "God, what have I done?" he muttered. more to himself than to anyone else. Alyssa watched him, a flicker of pity crossing her features, but she quickly hardened again. "Don't expect me to feel sorry for you," she said, her tone steely. "I'm here for Naomi. I came because she needs someone who actually cares about her." Her words stabbed at Eric's conscience, but he knew he deserved them. No matter how contrite he felt, he had to face the reality that he'd abandoned his wife during one of the most vulnerable moments of her life. The hours dragged on until a doctor entered, flipping through Naomi's chart. She greeted Eric and Alyssa with a brisk nod. "Naomi's condition is improving slightly. We'll continue to monitor her blood pressure. If things go well, we can transfer her to a regular maternity room soon." Relief flooded Eric's face. "Can she see the baby then?" The doctor paused. "Possibly, but the baby's also under watch in the NICU. We might allow brief visits if her vitals stay stable." Eric exhaled, grateful for a sliver of hope. "Thank you, doctor." Once the doctor left, Eric turned back to Naomi. Her eyelids fluttered, and she mumbled something. He leaned in. "I'm here," he said softly. "Naomi." Her eyelids opened a crack, revealing eyes red-rimmed from tears and fatigue. She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to recognize him. Then, in a voice raw from exhaustion, she whispered, "You weren't there." Eric's throat constricted. He wanted to explain, to blame confusion, ignorance, or some misguided assumption that it wasn't real labor. But he knew none of that would suffice. "I'm sorry," he managed, his eyes brimming with tears. Naomi shook her head slightly. "I called and called. You laughed at me." His chest tightened as he recalled his dismissive words and that heartless chuckle. "I was wrong. I was out of my mind. He stopped, seeing the utter disappointment in her gaze. Naomi closed her eyes, too weak to continue the conversation, but her soft reply slashed at his heart. "Some things can't be undone." A paralyzing silence followed, punctuated only by the steady beeping of the machines. Eric sank back in his chair, tears slipping down his cheeks. He had come too late. His wife was not only physically fragile but emotionally shattered, and he had no guarantee she would ever forgive him. Naomi's condition improved slowly over the next 2 days. She was moved to a quieter room, and the NICU allowed her a brief visit to see the baby. Eric accompanied her, pushing her wheelchair. Naomi never asked him to come. She simply didn't protest when he offered. She looked numb, as though running on autopilot. In the NICU, they approached the tiny incubator where their child lay. The baby's eyes were closed, a feeding tube snaking down a delicate throat, the breathing apparatus softly hissing. Naomi lifted a trembling hand to the incubator's side, tears sliding down her cheeks. Eric stood beside her, tears filling his own eyes at the frail sight of their newborn. "They're so tiny," he whispered, voice cracking. Naomi didn't respond. She continued to stare, her shoulders shaking silently. Eric yearned to comfort her, to place a hand on her shoulder and say something, anything, that might heal the chasm between them. But the invisible wall Naomi had built around her grief seemed impenetrable. After a few minutes, a nurse gently indicated it was time for Naomi to rest again. Eric wheeled her out, the corridor's fluorescent lights glaring overhead. When they reached her room, she asked him to leave. "I need to be alone," she murmured, her voice flat. Eric nodded, his heart heavy. "Okay," he said, backing out of the room. I'll be nearby if you need me." She didn't reply. She only turned her face away, tears falling onto the hospital blanket. Eric spent that night in the hospital's waiting room, curled up on an uncomfortable chair. He couldn't bring himself to go home, where every room would remind him of his failings. Jessica hadn't called or texted, and a twisted part of him was relieved. He needed to sort out his shattered life before even considering what to do about her. Early the next morning, he decided to bring Naomi some comfort items. He drove back to the house, stumbling into the living room that still bore the remnants of Naomi's special dinner. Plates with dried food, a tablecloth stained with melted candle wax. The sight tore at him, a gruesome reminder of his betrayal. He packed a small bag with Naomi's favorite robe, some slippers, and toiletries. As he passed the nursery, he paused. The crib stood silent, an unworn baby blanket folded neatly inside. A wave of sadness crashed over him. Their baby should have come home to this, safe and full term. Instead, Naomi and their child were fighting battles in a hospital room, and he'd all but abandoned them in their hour of greatest need. By the time he returned, Naomi was awake, but the tension in the room felt suffocating. He placed the bag gently on the chair. "I brought you some things from home," he murmured. She nodded, not meeting his eyes. "Thank you." He cleared his throat, desperation leaking into his voice. "Naomi, please. Let me know what I can do. I know I messed up. I know I messed up badly, but I'm here now, and I want to help." She glanced at him with eyes dulled by heartbreak and exhaustion. "Eric, you need to think about what you really want, about who you really are." Her voice was shaky. "Because this, what you did, it can't just be undone with an apology." He felt an ache in his chest so profound he thought he might double over. "I know," he whispered, "but I swear, I'll do whatever it takes." Naomi closed her eyes. "Right now, I need to focus on our baby's health. That's all I can handle." A silence stretched between them, thick with remorse and unspoken resentment. Finally, Eric nodded. "Okay," he said, stepping back. "I'll leave you to rest." He lingered for a moment, wishing desperately for a comforting word, a gesture of hope. But Naomi kept her eyes closed, shutting him out. As Eric left the room, he realized that his journey toward redemption, if redemption was even possible, would be long and painful. He had arrived too late, and the damage was immense. He could only pray that with time, Naomi might find it in her heart to let him in again. But for now, he would remain in the periphery, a man forced to confront the wreckage he had created. And Naomi, with a child clinging to life in an incubator, had no space for illusions. She would focus on survival, hers and the baby's, while Eric wrestled with the bitter truth that sometimes love is not enough to erase a betrayal too deep to forgive. In the days that followed, Eric hovered around the hospital like a ghost. He would visit the NICU, pressing a hand to the glass of the incubator as he watched his baby's tiny chest rise and fall with machine-assisted breaths. Then he'd drift to the cafeteria, sipping bad coffee and replaying the last few months in his mind. The lies he'd told, the nights he'd spent with Jessica, the moments he'd ignored Naomi's calls. He tortured himself with the memory of Naomi's voice on the phone that night, begging him to come, and his dismissive laugh. Every beep of the hospital's machines rang like an echo of that heartless sound. Naomi, steadily recovering, was finally able to spend more time with the baby. She and Eric existed in the same space, but rarely spoke. The silence between them was thick with unspoken grief. Nurses sometimes remarked how well Naomi was doing physically, but Eric noticed a distance in her eyes, as though a part of her spirit had been irreparably damaged. Alyssa came by often, carrying fresh clothes, healthy snacks, and an endless supply of moral support. Eric felt her hostility like daggers every time their paths crossed. One afternoon, he cornered Alyssa in the hallway. "Alyssa, please," he pleaded. "I know you hate me right now, but I just want to know how to fix this." She spun around, eyes blazing. "Fix this? You think you can fix this with flowers or a grand gesture? You abandoned her in labor. You cheated on her. You nearly cost your wife and child their lives." Eric's face paled at the brutality of her words, but he knew she was right. I never meant for any of this to happen," he mumbled. Alyssa scoffed. "Well, it did happen. Naomi may be too exhausted to push you away right now, but don't think she's forgotten everything you did." Eric nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I get it. I deserve all your anger. But please, help me be there for her and the baby. I want to do the right thing now." Alyssa hesitated, caught between her loyalty to Naomi and a flicker of compassion for Eric's evident remorse. "Finally," she said, "I'll tell you one thing. Naomi is focused on that baby's recovery. If you really want to help, then be there for your child. Show up every day. Don't force your presence on Naomi if she doesn't want it, but don't vanish. Do you understand?" He nodded vigorously. "Yes, thank you." She huffed, turning away. "Don't thank me. Thank Naomi, if she ever finds it in her heart to forgive you. Eric took Alyssa's advice to heart. He made it a point to spend hours in the NICU, talking softly to the baby through the plastic walls, learning about the medical equipment and procedures from the nurses. He changed into scrubs, washed his hands meticulously, and gently touched the baby's tiny foot with a fingertip, marveling at how delicate it felt. Sometimes, Naomi would be there, watching him with a guarded expression. He sensed her internal conflict. A part of her wanted to see him as the caring father. Another part still raged at his betrayal. In those moments, Eric's regret churned painfully inside him. At night, he slept in a cheap motel near the hospital, a far cry from Jessica's plush apartment or the comfort of his own bed. The days passed in a slow, agonizing rhythm of hospital visits, NICU updates, and silent heartbreak. One evening, Naomi was finally released from the hospital, though the baby remained in NICU. Eric offered to drive her home, but she quietly refused. Alyssa came instead, helping Naomi into her car. Eric stood awkwardly by the hospital entrance, watching them leave. He felt a pang at the sight of Naomi's frail form, supported by her friend's arm. That was his job, to be her pillar of strength. But he had shattered that role with his actions. Realizing he could do nothing more at the moment, Eric went to the hospital chapel. It was a small, quiet room bathed in the soft glow of stained glass windows. He sank onto a pew, burying his face in his hands. For the first time in years, he prayed. He prayed for the baby's health, for Naomi's healing, and for a sliver of hope that his marriage might be salvageable. Tears burned his eyes as he confessed silently all the ways he had let them down. Leaving the chapel, he felt drained but somewhat lighter, as if admitting his failings had at least taken a step toward redemption. Yet the reality remained. He had no idea if Naomi would ever trust him again. Over the next few weeks, the baby's condition slowly improved. Doctors noted progress in lung function, and they began weaning the baby off some of the more invasive respiratory support. Naomi visited daily, often refusing to speak to Eric beyond polite acknowledgments. Still, Eric persisted. He arrived every morning to greet the nurses and learn about the baby's overnight progress. He changed diapers under the nurse's supervision, gingerly fed the baby with a tiny bottle, and read stories in a soft voice, hoping the sound would reassure his child. The NICU staff saw his dedication, their initial wariness fading into some measure of respect. They understood family crises were complex, and Eric's remorse seemed genuine. Once, a nurse named Meredith patted his shoulder sympathetically. "Your child is lucky to have a devoted father," she said, not knowing the full extent of his betrayal. Eric forced a small smile, haunted by the truth. Naomi grew physically stronger as well, but her emotional wounds were far from healed. She interacted with Eric cordially in the NICU, focusing mainly on the baby. Any conversations about their marriage were met with silence or a deflection. One afternoon, after a successful feeding session, Eric mustered the courage to speak to Naomi. "I know this isn't the time or place," he began softly, "but I need you to know that I'm done with Jessica. I ended things the moment I realized what I'd lost. I'm so sorry." Naomi's eyes flickered with a mixture of pain and anger. She set down a small knitted hat she had brought for the baby. "I appreciate that you're here for our child," she said carefully. "But what we had, the trust, the love, it's broken." Eric's voice trembled. "Can I ever earn it back?" She glanced at the sleeping baby, her expression conflicted. "I don't know," she whispered, tears brimming. "Right now, I'm just trying to keep our baby alive. That's all I can handle." He nodded, tears gathering in his own eyes. "I understand." Naomi cradled the baby gently, the lines of fatigue and heartache etched deeply into her face. "You should go home," she said quietly. "I'll be here a while longer." Eric realized she needed space, so he left, feeling the crushing weight of regret once again. As he made his way down the hospital corridor, he couldn't escape the suffocating realization that his actions had nearly cost him not just his child, but also the one person he had pledged to love and protect. He thought about Jessica, how easily she had moved on to wealthier interests. He thought about the cold dinners and unanswered calls that once symbolized his neglect. Most of all, he thought about Naomi's whispered words in the hospital bed. Some things can't be undone. Like a wound that refused to close, regret bled into every corner of his life. He vowed he would spend however long it took to mend what was left, if Naomi would allow him that chance. But a gnawing fear persisted. Sometimes, no matter how genuine the remorse, the damage inflicted is too great to heal. Eric prayed, with every fiber of his being, that their child's survival would offer a flicker of hope for a new start. Only time would reveal if that hope could become reality, or if it was destined to remain an impossible dream. Months passed, marked by a slow but steady improvement in the baby's health. Naomi and Eric were at the hospital almost daily, coordinating schedules to ensure that someone was always there to provide kangaroo care, skin-to-skin contact that experts said would help the baby gain strength. The tiny newborn gradually put on weight, learned to breathe without constant machine assistance, and even started taking a bottle with minimal difficulty. The NICU nurses were cautiously optimistic about a discharge timeline, though they emphasized the need for vigilant care at home. During this period, Naomi and Eric functioned more like co-parents than a married couple. Their conversations revolved around feeding times, oxygen levels, and medical updates. At home, Naomi stayed in the master bedroom, while Eric often slept on the couch. She had allowed him back into the house for the baby's sake, but their emotional connection was tenuous at best. Eric attended counseling on his own, grappling with the guilt and the self-destructive patterns that had led him to cheat on Naomi. He found himself opening up about childhood insecurities, fears of inadequacy, and the misguided notion that Jessica's attention could fill the void he felt. His therapist urged him to be patient, to allow Naomi space to heal, and to show consistency in his dedication to both her and the baby. One crisp autumn day, the long-awaited moment arrived. The doctor announced the baby was stable enough to go home. Naomi's eyes filled with tears of relief as she signed the discharge papers. The baby, still small and in need of special care, would require follow-up appointments and possibly some medical equipment at home, but the worst seemed behind them. Eric stood nearby, watching Naomi gently buckle their child into an infant car seat. A wave of gratitude swept over him. He reached out to help, and Naomi allowed him to assist, though she kept her expression guarded. The drive home felt surreal. Naomi sat in the back seat with the baby, her eyes never leaving the tiny form. Eric drove carefully, acutely aware of how precarious life felt at that moment. Every breath the baby took felt like a victory over the terrors of early birth. When they arrived at the house, Eric carried the baby inside for the first time. The nursery stood ready, decorated with pastel colors and stuffed animals that had once seemed like a naive fantasy. Naomi followed, her posture tense, as if she feared something might go wrong at any moment. Eric gently placed the baby in the crib, tears gathering in his eyes. He glanced at Naomi, who was watching silently, her emotions swirling behind her stoic gaze. That evening, after feeding the baby and putting them to sleep, Naomi and Eric found themselves in the living room. The quiet hum of the baby monitor underscored the fragility of the moment. Naomi sank onto the sofa, pressing a hand to her forehead. Eric sat in an armchair opposite her, giving her the space she seemed to need. For a long time, they sat in silence. Finally, Naomi spoke, her voice trembling with fatigue. "I never imagined our life turning out like this." Eric swallowed hard. "Neither did I." She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "I loved you. I still care about you. But I'm broken, Eric. Every time I see you, I remember how alone I felt that night." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I know, and I regret it every single day." She exhaled, a shaky breath escaping her lips. "What happens now?" Eric's heart pounded, knowing this was a crossroads. "I want to be here for you and the baby," he said earnestly. "I want to earn back your trust, no matter how long it takes. If you need me to sleep on the couch for the next year, I'll do it. If you want me to move out, I'll honor that too. But I don't want to abandon my responsibilities again." Naomi wiped a tear from her cheek. "I don't know if I can ever feel the same way about you," she admitted, her voice cracking. "But I can't deny that the baby needs both parents. And a part of me still hopes we might find a way back to each other." Eric rose from his chair, moving to kneel in front of her. He hesitated, then gently took her hands in his. "I'll do whatever it takes," he whispered, tears filling his eyes. She studied his face, searching for any sign of deceit. All she saw was contrition and sadness. Slowly, she nodded. "I'm not making any promises," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But for now, we focus on the baby. We try to heal, if we can." Eric nodded, relief flooding him. He pressed his forehead against her hands, grateful she was even considering giving him another chance. "Thank you," he whispered, voice quivering with emotion. "I won't let you down again." In the days that followed, Eric devoted himself to being the best father he could be. He took night shifts so Naomi could rest, learning to soothe the baby's fragile cries. He cooked meals, cleaned the house, and kept up with every medical recommendation. Little by little, Naomi's guarded demeanor softened, but only slightly. She began to speak more freely, though she still carried a look of lingering hurt. At one point, Eric asked if she'd be open to couples therapy. Naomi hesitated, then agreed to try. Their sessions were filled with raw confessions, tears, and moments when Naomi had to step out to calm herself. Yet, through these painful discussions, they began to uncover the roots of their problems: unrealistic expectations, lack of communication, and Eric's misguided search for validation. Healing was neither quick nor guaranteed. There were days Naomi collapsed into tears, overwhelmed by flashbacks of going into labor alone. There were nights Eric relapsed into a spiral of guilt, fighting the urge to call Jessica just to confront the chaos he'd chosen. But he resisted, deleting her number from his phone, blocking her on social media. Eventually, Naomi allowed Eric back into the bedroom. They shared a bed more for convenience, as caring for a baby was exhausting. But each night, Eric treated the space between them with respect, never pushing for intimacy she wasn't ready to give. One morning, about 6 months after the baby's birth, Naomi watched Eric cuddle their now chubbier, bright-eyed infant on the sofa. Soft sunlight streamed through the curtains, illuminating the scene. The baby giggled, reaching a tiny hand to pat Eric's cheek. He laughed, the sound genuine and filled with wonder. A pang struck Naomi's heart. She realized she had begun to feel glimmers of warmth toward Eric again. Tentative, like a young plant emerging after a harsh winter. She was still cautious, scars not fully healed, but she saw in Eric's eyes a man changed by regret, determined to atone for his mistakes. Later that day, while the baby napped, Naomi approached Eric in the kitchen. "Thank you for everything you've been doing," she said quietly, fiddling with the hem of her shirt. "I see the effort, and it means a lot." He turned off the faucet and dried his hands, surprise lifting his eyebrows. "I'm just trying to be here for you both," he replied. She nodded, summoning a small smile. "I appreciate it." They stood there for a moment, the air between them holding the faintest promise of reconciliation. Naomi reached for his hand, hesitant but sincere. "Let's keep trying," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "For the baby, and maybe for us too." Eric's own eyes misted as he gently squeezed her hand. "Yes," he said, voice trembling with emotion. "Let's." In that fragile moment, they took a step toward a second chance, an uncertain, imperfect, and hard-earned opportunity to rebuild. The scars of betrayal and the memory of karma's painful strike would never fully disappear. But as they stood together in the quiet embrace of their home, baby sleeping peacefully in the next room, they both realized something profound. Sometimes, near tragedies can bloom into second beginnings, if those who caused the pain are willing to walk the long road of redemption. And thus, Naomi and Eric's story, once marred by betrayal, entered a new chapter, one where the promise of healing and forgiveness coexisted with the bittersweet knowledge that some wounds take time, patience, and unwavering commitment to truly mend. The end. I hope you enjoyed the story.